All right, we get started. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about Vitess. I actually have some Vitess stickers later in case you're interested. You can come and collect them from me. My name is Sugu. I now have a new title. It's called CTO for Planet Scale Data. It's a new company that we started recently, whose sole purpose is to support the Vitess project. I have my co-founder here, Jiten, who's also sitting. And previously, many of you probably know me as the software engineer from YouTube. I was at YouTube for over 11 years, and that's where I co-created this project. It was around 2010, and have been working on it since then. So one disclaimer or warning is I may accidentally regress into thinking that I'm still at YouTube. So if that happens, wake me up and remind me that that's not the case anymore. All right. So I'm going to talk about a couple of problems that have been growing in the MySQL industry. So whenever I say MySQL, assume the base class, MariaDB and all other variants of MySQL. Sometimes you can even like abstract it out to any RDBMS. The one problem that has been growing with MySQL instances is that they all run only on one box. Like when about like this, it's been now 8 years when we started the Vitess project. We thought we were actually solving this problem for the big companies like Facebooks and Twitters because they are the ones who have a lot of data and they need to shard and everything. But over the years, what we have noticed is that even small, tiny companies are beginning to outgrow their single MySQL instance almost in no time. And this is actually, we should have actually seen this coming. People have been talking about data exploding, big data and all that stuff. And now it's really affecting the choices that people are making about storage solutions. Often they are looking at MySQL and they are thinking, is this going to carry me all the way if my business grows suddenly in leaps and bounds, or if I suddenly need to store a lot more data, will I be able to continue to work with MySQL? And some of them are actually looking at other alternatives, like what else is out there if it is not MySQL. And I will talk about some of the choices that I've seen people making. We basically, I think we need to fix this problem. And Vitess is actually trying to help there. And the other big trend, obviously, is that the cloud is here. And pretty much most RDBMSs are kind of left behind, mainly because culturally or traditionally, they are all built to run on a single machine. They have the whole machine for themselves and they have all the resources there. But in this new container world, you are supposed to live within the smaller box that you are given. And those containers don't stay up for 6 months and stuff like that. They go out, they go down anytime they like. Cloud environments like to move your instance all over the place. And you don't have the whole box anymore. Sometimes somebody else starts doing a lot of I/O and you are short in bandwidth. And the fact that all this is happening changes the way your application has to work with the database. You cannot have these config files and static IPs that you use to connect to the database anymore. You need to have a more dynamic, discoverable API that applications have to use to connect to the databases. And the other player now that you are now hearing more about or will hear more about is Kubernetes, which is now pretty much being seen as the future operating system of distributed applications. And there is actually no solution right now. There are some people working on operators and stuff to run RDBMSs in Kubernetes, but right now there is no good solution if you just have a single MySQL instance just to move it there. So these are some of the problems. And the cloud problem actually aggravates the previous problem of the transactional data exploding and is kind of, many people are like almost feeling stuck with MySQL. So what do I do with this thing, right? So fear not, there are ways out. That's what I'm here to talk about. And so here are some of the solutions that people have used when they find that they have outgrown their single instance MySQL. By far the most common one is application sharding. And it is now becoming the least favorite option because, one, it requires your application to be rewritten. And it means that you need additional engineering effort to be able to do this. And the second problem, which is even worse, is you have to live with it for the rest of your life. That is actually now the problem that companies are beginning to feel. And some of these companies are not really core technology companies. They are like a retail shop, and they are like a phone application and stuff. They do this application level sharding, and now they have this debt or burden that they have to carry. And sometimes your shards outgrow a single instance, then you have to reshard, and they don't even know how to do that, right? So there are various challenges with application sharding. And some people have said, just forget all this, just let's go to NoSQL. At least it'll scale. We'll deal with every other problem that comes up with NoSQL, but at least we won't be stuck staying in one box. There are also some paid solutions, which I won't talk much about since it's an open source conference. And they are also actually not all perfect. That's all I can say for now. If you can later come and talk to me about what solutions there are and what problems they have. There is actually a newer category that is called NewSQL. I'm sure you've all heard of it. Cockroach, TIDB, and Yugabyte are some new companies that are actually building a ground-up SQL scalable solution. The main drawback is actually a time problem, is that they are all new. They are just beginning to get their first versions of SQL running. And if you look at MySQL, it's been tuned for over 20 years now. And these people are where MySQL was approximately 20 years ago. So it'll be a while before they get there. But they will. If they have enough financial backing, they will eventually get there. But right now, it may not be immediately possible to go into production with them. It's kind of my opinion. Obviously, these companies are here. They will probably help you go to production to the extent that they can. And the other problem is that these companies, some of these companies have a open source offering and a commercial offering. And there is, we don't know whether you can just take the open source and run with it in production yet. So there's not enough data to know that that is possible, or whether there are examples, whether there are any examples that exist. So those are some of the things that I see with the NewSQL, but it's definitely something to watch out for. So at this point, today, if I have to make a data decision, it feels, the way I see it is these are all inferior solutions to what MySQL can do for you. So functionally, if you look at MySQL and what it can do for you, you move away from that and come into this, you are actually downgrading in terms of functionality, right? And why are you doing it? You're doing it only because you have to scale. So the obvious question is, why not both? So that's basically what Vitess tries to do, is gives you all the functionality and power that MySQL has, but at the same time, you can keep scaling indefinitely. So why is Vitess capable of giving you both? Is because underneath it just runs MySQL. You basically, if you have a MySQL, you deploy Vitess on top of it, and then afterwards you can reshard your database without the application knowing much about it. And how big can we get with MySQL? It's pretty big. We call it massive scale, which is pretty large. Actually, I was talking to Yoshinori earlier. That's what he defines. Yoshinori is from Facebook. He defines that as a medium scale. But we call it massive scale because we call it, oh, we can go to tens of thousands of nodes. So But the cool stuff is that it is open source, and we have been working on it for 8 years now. So a lot of time and effort has been spent to make the project production viable. You can take what is available in Vitess, take it to production, and scale it to millions of QPS, and it will run for you, no problem. And for the longest time, YouTube was the only company that was using Vitess. But now we have a very large, not very large, a decent number of companies, but running at very large scale. Some of them are, many of them are running 6-digit QPS in their instances. And many of the companies have completely rely on Vitess for all their data, which is super exciting. And which companies are using Vitess? Here is a list. There is actually more. These are the companies that have given us permission to use their logos. As you can see, there is a name you may not recognize, which is JD.com. But it's because it's a Chinese portal. It turns out that they are the second largest portal in China after Alibaba. And they've completely migrated their business over to Vitess. They run over 300 key spaces or databases, and they run, again, comfortably 6-digit QPS. You have Slack, which has actually made a major commitment both in terms of engineering effort and operations, and they have actually contributed a lot to the project too. They are in the process of migrating to Vitess. There are actually plenty of talks that Slack has given. We even have Guido here, who was working on that migration. There's a few others. There's HubSpot and Square. Square, for example, is using Vitess for their Square Cache application, and they're already sharded. They started with a single shard and then deployed Vitess and started resharding it. But the more important thing here is, if you see, there are some names you will not recognize. These are actually pretty small companies, but they have huge data. Many of them, again, run pretty large QPS. And this is an indication of what is coming, how the industry is changing. It's not the YouTubes anymore that require massive scalability. There are some small companies probably that have never heard of Vitess, and they probably went to the route that you chose some of the routes that I showed before. But I think there are a lot more companies that are coming up that are going to require big data and are going to wonder, can I go to MySQL? Will it scale for me when I need to? And at least Vitess is there to take care of them when that situation comes. There's actually a third kind of need that we are beginning to see. Many of these big companies like Pinterest, Twitter, they already have sharded. They already have sharded solutions. But their secondary databases is beginning to grow, and they need sharding for those databases. And many of them are saying, I don't want to go through this application sharding exercise anymore. And some of them are actually coming to Vitess to see if they can actually deploy Vitess on top of their MySQL instance and do the sharding. So far, so good? All right. So what does Vitess do? Actually, this slide usually takes me 1 hour to cover. If I drill down into all the stuff that Vitess can do, like 8 years of development, you can develop a lot of things in that time. The one thing, so I've categorized it into 3 parts. The one thing that Vitess will do is make your MySQL happier. So if you're running tens of thousands of nodes, simple tasks that you usually expect a human can do should not be done by a human, because if problems appear at that scale, it's very hard to manage. So many of that thing about query mediation, making sure that queries don't run for too long, making sure that transactions don't run for too long, are all built into the proxy that Vitess has. If there is a sudden overload, Vitess can take care of throttling it, throwing errors to the application, saying, I'm overloaded, I'm not accepting any more transactions. So all those things are built into Vitess. The other thing is, this actually interesting story. Vitess was originally, in 2010, we built it for actually bare metal. We were running in YouTube's own data centers. And at some point of time, we had to migrate to Google's Borg Cloud. So if you're a Google, how many of you have worked at Google before? Oh, there you go. So if you write an application, oh, you, Mark himself. So if you write an application that runs on Google Cloud, it's pretty much guaranteed that the application cannot be open sourced because the Google ecosystem is so unique and there are so many internal dependencies. They are such that if you write an application in Google Cloud, you cannot open source it. So we had an interesting reverse problem is we have an open source project that runs on bare metal and we have to make that run into Google's cloud. So how did we do that? We basically built an abstraction layer for every Google Cloud feature that we had to integrate with and saved this open source project and fought for that for remaining open source. We'll say we'll do whatever it takes to build these abstractions to make sure that Vitess runs in the cloud, but we want to keep this project as an open source project. So it was kind of hard, but we succeeded, but it paid off. The reason why it paid off is because when Kubernetes came, we were ready for it. We said, oh, cloud, no problem. You just build all these other pieces, put them together, we are ready for the cloud. So, right now, many of those companies that I showed you actually run on Kubernetes, run on the cloud, run on Docker. I mean, for the longest time, people were wondering, can MySQL run on Docker? We do huge QPS on Docker, some of these people. GKE, AWS, Kubernetes AWS, Mesos, Azure, like you take all these things, combine them differently, there's probably a configuration there that Vitess runs on. And finally, icing on the cake is it's indefinitely scalable, so you don't have to worry about that part. And even in the indefinitely scalable part, you can say indefinitely scalable, but the important part is that you don't have to rewrite your entire application to be able to scale it. Because all the queries that you send to MySQL, to send to Vitess, it will figure out how to break it up and send it to different parts and get you the results back, as if it was a unified database. Yes?
Yeah, you still have to rewrite because you need to talk to a web server or web API.
I will answer that question on my next slide. And the other part is that even if once you have sharded your system and later you suddenly realize that you're running out of capacity and you want to reshard, there are workflows that will do this for you with application noticing absolutely no change at all. We do this. YouTube does this multiple times, like 2 to 3 times, every 2 to 3 months they do a resharding, major resharding. We used to make big announcements before, now nobody tells anyone anything. They just go and reshard it and there's usually never any issues. So this is the MySQL, this is the Vitess architecture. So the most important part of this architecture is the VT gate. The VT gate speaks the MySQL protocol. And the app server, instead of connecting to MySQL, just connects to VT gate and nothing else. After that, it just treats the VT gate that it's connected to as a giant database. Except that underneath, it's actually a bunch of smaller databases. And this architecture, actually, I can spend a lot of time. We really, really like it. Each and every one of these pieces plays a very important role in this whole thing, especially, for example, the lock server is the one that makes it possible for Vitess to run in the cloud so comfortably. I'm going to rush because I will be soon running out of time, and I wanted to cover a couple more things. I wanted to cover the pluggable architecture. I've already covered. It's actually the most important thing that we had to take care of while making this architecture pluggable is to not compromise on performance. So in spite of all this pluggability, Vitess latency is still pretty low. It adds about 2 milliseconds as total overhead to your database, but then you get this indefinite scalability. And in terms of project, I wanted to cover how we manage the project because that's actually the best part. The reason why I keep wanting to go back and keep working on this project is because we have maintained very high standards in this project, to the extent that some people get irritated, especially when we start insisting on unit tests and strict code coverage requirements. They're like, do I have to do all this? I don't care. This thing people are going to take and run into production. Every code that you write that is going to serve a query, it has to be tested, it has to be covered, and if needed, you need to write end-to-end tests also. And so we followed this discipline from day one and have been very strict about it. All coding standards are enforced. We have all kinds of CI tools that make sure that you don't break those things. And if your code is not readable, we don't even take your pull request. So, but then that has actually caused over time some really very high quality contributions to the project. And this is big news that's coming. CNCF actually is going to accept Vitess as one of its projects. It's actually pretty much a done deal. The official announcement is happening tomorrow. So keep watching various blog posts. They took the CNCF a long time to accept Vitess, almost a year. And the reason is because they could not find a project similar to Vitess. They could not find anything else to compare it with, because in reality there isn't one right now. I don't know why, but they just couldn't. And so they did a lot of due diligence. They interviewed many users. They looked at maturity, they looked at contributors, and then finally said, yeah, it's right. There is no project like Vitess, but it's awesome. It really does what it is supposed to do. And after all the due diligence, we are now reaching the end. Tomorrow will be accepted in CNCF, which means that Vitess will get to benefit from all the cool stuff that CNCF has. Personally, for me, the reason why I'm excited is because until today, Vitess was always seen as a YouTube project, but now it's becoming a truly community-owned project. So I'm hoping that this will attract more contributors and attention in terms of adoption. So in terms of roadmap, Vitess is not perfect, but so there are still things that need to be done. So if you are a good open source person, if you know query engines, you know things like that, we would like to welcome your contributions. The one place where Vitess is short on is some cross-shard queries. It says, sorry, I can't handle it. It does most of them, but not all of them. If you do some complex aggregation with ordering and sorting, it says, please rewrite your query in such a way that I can do it. So help with migration tools and configurability, those are the areas that we think we need to focus on. In conclusion, the main message is, if you are hesitating about using MySQL because it cannot scale, don't worry about it. We have it covered. And there is plenty of examples of people having scaled with Vitess at really, really large scales. I was actually telling somebody else today, if your engineer came and told you, I want to store 100 terabytes of data, what would you tell them? Oh, is there a way you can prune it? Is there a way you can reduce it? Say, no, don't worry. Say, bring it on. We'll take care of it, So that's the kind of attitude we should have when people come to us for storing data. Or running in the cloud is also not a problem. And finally, help build Vitess because it's an awesome tool. Yeah. That's it. Thank you very much.